Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, liebe Gäste.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear guests here at the Heinrich-Böll Foundation, and a warm welcome to everybody who's joining us via the live stream. Hello and a warm welcome on behalf of the Heinrich-Böll Foundation
zu der Veranstaltung Google, Apple,
Finanzwende Recherche. I would like to welcome you all to this event, Google, Apple and Co. From tech giants to financial giants. We are delighted that you are here, that you've made it here, and that this highly topical subject is attracting so much interest. My name is Yolanda Rothe, and I'm very glad to be facilitating this event tonight. In just a few minutes, we will introduce the new study of research from Finanzwende, financial transition that is, in order to hear about Google, Apple, and others. We have a high-ranking panel here, but before starting the panel discussion, I am very glad to pass the floor to the chairman of the Heinrich-Böll Foundation. So a warm round of applause for Philipp Albrecht.
Liebe Yolanda Rothe,
dear Yolanda Rothe, ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome to the Heinrich-Böll Foundation. And actually, this topic couldn't be more topical because we can see time and again the relevance of the big tech players and the role they play in politics and in the public sphere. So the big tech players and their power, and especially the financial power, is something we are highlighting here. I'm very glad that we've been able to win over such a high-ranking panel, and I'm glad about our cooperation with Finanzwende. Well, the power associated with this is really obvious, but it has really changed if we remember the inauguration of Donald Trump, where really the heads of Meta, Google, Apple, and Amazon were standing in the front row. And, well, an agenda is now being stands for anything but a democratic cooperation and a fair, just society. Well, we need to shed a light on exactly this. The differences between democracy and oligarchy are really being blurred all the time. We need to take a close look because it is going to continue. So this financial power as part of the political interaction of forces, also in the geopolitical sphere, is really relevant. J.D. Vance said even before the elections, if you Europeans are regulating X, we will, on the other hand, question the assistance for Ukraine. And they're doing exactly that. And at this transition, and we can see how the financial power has shifted, and the interaction of behavior of the big industrial players has really gained weight. And looking behind the scenes, making an analysis and organizing a study, taking a close look, all this is a very laudable effort. And for that reason, I'm really glad that Finanzwende did exactly this. And for example, cryptocurrencies with their brokers and the business models and the big players and the digital international corporations and showing the interconnections. All this is very important, and this will be the topic of tonight's panel discussion. And if we once again become clear about the relationship and the political weight of these big tech companies such as Apple and Microsoft, Amazon, and Meta, they have a market capitalization, also Nvidia. This is more than 16 trillion euros. They have doubled since 2020 alone. This is twice the gross domestic product of the entire EU. That means 27 countries. This is a scope that no doubt means a difficult relationship between power and financial power and politics. And well, the question is how limits can still be set. And I believe that the reaction that Elon Musk and also Mark Zuckerberg that they showed in December is characterized by the fact that they have noticed that the EU is not just willing but also able to regulate its corporations and to actually obtain what they want to do. So this is what they sense from the other side of the Atlantic, and they do not want to go back, and it is geopolitical influence of the United States. All this means a hard fight, a hard struggle. I noticed this when it came to the General Data Protection Regulation, where these corporations try to do anything to use their power and use, like the American Chamber of Commerce, and they tried to frighten Europe what could happen with the market and with the EU once this regulation would enter into force. Nothing of this actually materialized. However, we have obtained that European regulations have set limits to these corporations. This touches on data protection, but also competition, like the Digital Services Act. And especially when it comes to the interculation of business models like payment services. And if we take a look at the services in the fintech industry, whether the big tech companies shouldn't be regulated to a stronger degree, how can this be done? That's a question that we will be discussing tonight. And we should not have this decided and leave this discourse in the data centers, but we should turn it into a political discourse. We want to contribute to this at the Heinrich-Böll Foundation, and this together with Finanzwende. In this spirit, a warm welcome to our panelists and to our facilitator, Yolanda. And I would now like to hand the floor back to you. Thank you also to you, Jan, for your friendly words of introduction, and thank you for setting the framework for this very complex and at the same time highly topical theme. Before we introduce the results of the Finanzwende study, I would like to give you a few pieces of information that touch on housekeeping here. Well, for everybody who wants to feel connected, for those who want to share contents directly, well, why don't you use the Wi-Fi of Heinrich-Böll Foundation? Well, the Wi-Fi is not too good here, so actually the Freifunk one, as you can see here, I can recommend it. Well, if you look for the bathrooms, it's in the ground floor. It is behind the stairs. And, well, for everybody who would like to listen to the English translation, actually, this is a German-speaking event, and we have simultaneous translation here. Why don't you give a round of applause to our two simultaneous interpreters? And if you have not yet a receiver, you can take it at the entrance, and then you are welcome to follow this event in the English language. And there is one more thing. In retrospect, we will publish this information and this whole event on YouTube. So be aware that your questions too will be recorded just as a piece of information, but there is also a possibility of asking questions via Mentimeter. It is a tool that we will be trying out in a minute together. And thus I've brought you another package. That means you can use your mobile device and use this QR code, the code that is shown here, where there is an error in the figures. So the figure would be 241744986. It is 241744986. And I would now like to try out whether Menti is actually working. And to that end, I have brought you a few questions. Well, you can't access it. How about the QR code? Maybe it works after all. And I will move a little bit so that everybody can actually scan the code. And let's try again. I've seen that some of you have been able to access it. By the way, does everybody in this room have a smartphone? And by the way, also for the participants joining us via the live stream, please join us for the Mentimeter discussion. So I've seen some positive answers, so I'll give you another moment so that you can respond to the first question. Do you have a smartphone? And then I would also like to ask in the analog way, is there anyone who deliberately is not using a cell phone, a smartphone? Oh, there are like 5 to 6 people, and probably also on the live stream. So the majority is using a smartphone. Now, question number 2. Do you occasionally pay something in the store using your smartphone?
Die gerade teilnehmen.
For those of you who are in the process of responding, it seems to be a 50-50 result. So 50% is saying they occasionally use their smartphone in order to pay for their shoppings in a bricks and mortar store, and 50% don't do it. The next question, have you paid something using your smartphone today, like your train ticket or the taxi?
Okay, die meisten sagen.
So most of you are saying no, but some of you have already paid something with their smartphone. Well, the good thing is we have tested Mentimeter now, but what's really interesting that there is a great deal of people using their smartphone for payment services, and that touches on the very topic of this event. And well, thus I would now like to ask a central figure to join us here. She's an economic scientist with a specialization of digitalization and the finance sector. Finance innovation and digital business models is her specialization, and she's going to introduce her research of Finanzwende. Carolina Melches from Finanzwende, you have the floor.
Ja, hallo.
Well, hello and welcome also from our side. My name is Carolina Melches, advisor for digitization in the financial sector at Finanzwende. For those of you who do not know us, we are an organization which strives for fair and sustainable financial markets. We have 2 units. On the one hand, the citizens movement, Finanzwende, so financial turnaround, which does political work in the form of campaigns, petitions, and we have the Finanzwende Recherche, financial turnaround research, for which I'm here. We are the research arm, the think tank of Finanzwende, and we are conducting analyses. We write studies and concepts on topics around the financial market and developments on the financial market, always with the objective to achieve fair and sustainable financial markets and to create a financial market which once again serves the citizens. Well, I have to get the pointer now. Before I start, I would like to thank the Mercator Foundation on behalf of Finanzwende, which has funded this project. Without the funding, this project would not have been possible. And also at the Heinrich-Böll Foundation, with whom we have organized this event together and to have made these nice rooms available for this event. And also, of course, to Yolanda Rothe for the moderation of this event. Thank you. And last but not least, I am standing here as part of the team of Finanzwende Recherche who have participated in this research project. Michael Peters is the co-author of this study, The Financial Services of Big Tech, which I will present right away. Our colleague, unfortunately, has fallen sick, but is following the event via live stream. So thank you very much for all the contributions. Well, so now I would like to start. Big tech in the financial sector. Big tech might be common to some of you, but not to everyone. So first of all, I would like to answer the question, what are actually big techs? Big tech is, or these are huge technological corporations, and their core business is online services, be it social media, the e-commerce or soft, but also hardware, and, for example, cloud services. And these are companies who are either coming from the US or China. I put up the names here on this slide. And what all these companies have in common is that in their core business, they have a quasi-monopoly. So they have a huge market share. And all these companies own digital platforms, digital ecosystems, which they continuously try to enhance and broaden, because the more activities and the more services these platforms can offer, the more valuable they get for the user and the more attractive they get. Well, we as Finanzwende have looked at how big tech go into the financial services sector and enhance their offers in this area. So I would like to start first with a global level. So for us, this means everything outside of the EU. And what we can see here is that apart from the core business of big tech, they go into two paths of the financial sector. One, via financial services. These are services that start with the users, so with you, with me, Apple Pay, Google Pay, for example. Everyone, I'm sure, knows that. And at the global level, we can see that there's quite a big group of services that they offer. And you can see here where the big tech companies have something on offer. And you can see that the financial services starts from digital wallets up until bank accounts. Apple, for example, offers a bank account in the US, up until loans, insurances, and also investments or asset management. And when you look at China, for example, you can see that big tech, in the meantime, has developed a large-scale and well-established presence. Tencent and Alipay, for example, this is the subsidiary of Alibaba, here in this slide mentioned as Alibaba, are covering 90% of all mobile payments in China on a daily basis. And in China, people pay with their smartphones, so cash is not really an issue anymore there. And also in the US, they have a broad range on offer. And the other pathway is via IT services, which do not start at the consumers, but start at financial institutes. And these are cloud services or AI assistants, for example, and they are being used in order to support the technological back office, for example, for core banking systems, the risk management, or the data storage. And here we can say that big tech is hugely present. Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and Alibaba today dominate 70% of the global cloud market. So it's not only the financial sector, of course, but also in the financial sector, these cloud services of big tech are extremely big and are used by many finance institutes. Within the EU, the picture is slightly different. You can look at this slide. So we have fewer tiles in blue. So especially when it comes to the financial services, the offer of big tech is confined largely to payment transaction services like digital wallets like Apple Pay, Google Pay. And we have some minor insurance offers or loan offers, however, quite specific in Europe. So it is like an insurance for your MacBook or a loan for your iPhone. So it's very targeted and very specific for specific products. So this is not really a broad-based insurance offer. So, for example, when you buy something at Amazon, you could insure something with an Amazon insurance. That's not the case. So when it comes to IT services at the European level, we see a huge presence of big tech. So the Bank of England, which is not the EU, of course, but the figures are quite similar in the EU, has stated once again that 70% of the banks and 80% of the insurance companies who are being overseen by the Bank of England use IT services of only 2 big tech companies. So we see a huge market concentration. And this is also something what the BaFin found out this year in its risk report, that the market concentration in the IT service sector is way too strong, and that it poses a risk, and that a large part of the financial institutes would not be able to reintegrate these services, the IT services. So it's a huge dependency that we see here. So this is actually the current situation. We see that big tech goes into the financial market also in Europe, and when we look at the trend, then they rather enhance their offers. When we want to understand the risks, then of course we first of all have to understand why big tech wants to enter the financial market, what the financial market makes it so attractive for big tech. And there are 3 big areas. I already said it. So big tech has huge digital platforms, and of course they want to enhance them. They want to broaden the services they offer constantly in order to remain attractive and become even more attractive. And offering financial services allows big tech to broaden their offer, but on the other hand, also to collect financial data and to generate financial income, especially if the financial data is not just useful in order to provide people with further offers in the financial segment, but also to make offers and generate products in the other business fields. So this means from such a financial offer, not only the financial segment benefits, but also the core business of big tech. With regard to the IT services, I already mentioned it a moment ago how huge the concentration there is, and also how big the market share is, especially when it comes to clouds, the cloud structure. So they become a critical infrastructure. I already said that the financial institutes are no longer able to reintegrate these IT services into their business, and this leads to a dependency from big tech, and thus strengthens their position in the whole system, and also their power, the power of the big tech. And lastly, it's little effort and huge revenue. Why? Because big tech already owns huge platforms. They have already a broad customer base, and they have the technological know-how, the technological infrastructure, and the financial resources, of course, in order to make highly attractive financial offers, and thus also to, safeguard and own large parts of the market. So we can even talk or say that this is a competition advantage because they have such a broad business model and they can use the resources from other business segments for the financial services. So the advantages of big tech when it comes to the development of financial products means that we, the population, the consumers, are faced with risks. So several risks at a time. I already said that the overall business of big tech benefits from the financial segment. This means they become bigger, and big companies in the financial sectors, of course, bring along risks, risk of concentration, and should critical functions fail, then of course it has an impact on the feasibility and of the financial market and the financial stability. So big tech, of course, has some competitive advantage when it comes to the development of financial offers and financial services, and this can also hamper fair competition because the other competitors do not have a digital platform, they do not have such a broad customer base, they do not have these financial resources. And this means that the financial models, of course, are also data-driven of the big tech. So the data that are being generated in one segment, usually with the approval of the users, be it voluntarily, knowingly or involuntarily, but these data can be used to optimize other segments. And this creates risks for data protection, for consumer protection, but also when it comes to cybersecurity, because we have huge data pools. So should there be a cyber attack or a data leak, then this means that a huge amount of data might be released or stolen. And last but not least, when it comes to the IT services, but also in the field of payment transactions, which are already quite dependent on non-European companies, they become critical infrastructure when they go into this sector, because a functioning payment system is also the basis of a functioning economy. And as these companies are not European companies, we are faced with risk for political independence and political sovereignty of the EU. And the problem here is that the supervision and rules, when companies provide financial services, they are usually directed at financial institutes. So the supervision of the BaFin, the rules that are being defined, are not focused and directed at tech companies who have quite a broad business model and now, in addition, financial services. And a large part of the risks that derive from big tech is based on the fact that there are data streams within the corporation, that there is technology that all segments use, and there are no clear rules on that. Plus, the supervision and the supervision practice has not yet adapted to this reality, and there's too little cooperation between different supervisory bodies who should actually cooperate with each other, like the financial supervision, data protection authorities, cybersecurity authorities, in order to identify risks and find good answers. So we thought about what needs to happen so that these risks can be addressed, and the answer needs to be a European one. And it comprises of basically two big segments for action. On the one hand, supervision and market structure, which needs to be adapted, and on the other hand, the structure of the big corporate companies. As I said, big tech risks are not big tech risks alone. So when we see or we want to address the risk posed by big tech in the financial sector, then the supervisory bodies need to cooperate more closely. We the different supervisory bodies have to come together, have to exchange information in order to understand risks and formulate answers. We also need an enhancement of the existing regulations, especially when it comes to the IT services and the competition regulations, in order to counter this market concentration. And in order to facilitate competition, we have to think about alternatives like the digital euro. This could, for example, reduce the dependency in the European payment transfer. In the second part, we have to look at the corporations themselves. So we need a new organization of the corporate structure so that the oversight and risk can be identified more easily. And big tech today have highly complex structures, and so that we can have a better supervision. The financial activities within big tech needs to be bundled and also separated. Separated means that there cannot be an exchange of data, no joint utilization of technology, and no financial streams between this isolated financial entity and the rest big tech. So thus, we can make sure that the risks that derive from this interaction of the different business units, based on the joint technology utilization and exchange of data, etc., that this can at least be controlled and monitored. And the financial entity then, of course, needs to be supervised by an authority which is more than just a financial supervision, and also data protection, cybersecurity authorities. So an authority which covers all the different areas. And when in a second step, we realize that this isolation within this corporation is not sufficient in order to control the risks, and big tech still concentrates market power, and significant parts of the market belong to the big tech, then of course we have to think about unbundling these corporations to separate the financial segment from the rest. So this can be done through competition law, but where it does not happen, as there's no active abuse of the market power, which is the prerequisite at the moment. So big tech would have to illegally abuse their position in order to get advantages. But where this does not happen, where big tech simply benefits from an unfair competitive advantage without doing anything illegal, there we have to unbundle the corporations also irrespectively of illegal actions. And there we do need a European unbundling authority or law, which already exists in the UK and was already on the agenda several years ago within the EU. It was no longer pursued, but the EU needs to, look into that again, and needs to once again launch this unbundling law. So this is our proposal. I'm happy to discuss that with you, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Ja, ganz herzlichen Dank für diese.
Thank you very much for presenting your study, Carolina.
Ja.
Well, you really did a good job showing all the risks and also the complexity of the entire situation. Let me start off with the first question. Why is it so important, especially today, to deal with this topic? Well, I think one of the most important reasons is the political momentum that we are seeing. I just mentioned this. We have the cooperation between the Trump administration and the big tech companies. So this means more political protection in that sense from the U.S. And big tech is now trying to achieve a situation where the risks that we already have in the EU are rolled back. But especially with a view to the financial services, we should instead become even stricter. We need to keep a close eye on this, and big tech companies are today too big and too powerful, even today, and we need to question whether such players should even move into such a system-relevant topic. Well, and one additional question before getting down to the panel discussion. We just saw in this room that 50% of those asked already use their smartphone for payment procedures, and it is comfortable, it's efficient, and the apps allow for that. So why should we be bothered in this room? Well, I would say that at the point where convenience comes with a price tag, there is data that can thus be skimmed off, and thus you are just pouring them into the big tech companies that can then consolidate their power, that can achieve positions in the markets and secure them and consolidate them. So this has little to do with fair competition or political sovereignty and democratic legitimation. So these topics cannot be reconciled, and for that reason, you really have to ask whether you feel it's worthwhile, even at the risk that you may lose control over your financial data. Thank you very much for this. And now I look forward to welcoming the other panelists. So Armand Zorn, member of the German Bundestag from the SPD, the Social Democrats in the German parliament. Professor Dr. Thomas Weck, Associate Professor for Public Law and Regulatory Affairs. And Aya Jaff, the founder, she's a founder, she's an author, she is a young entrepreneur and very active. Welcome. We already heard it in the presentation of the study. Apple, Amazon, Meta, they have been dominating the digital sphere for years now, and this is not even enough. So they are now also moving into the finance sector. We can see it as a threat for financial markets and also for democracy. This gives rise to questions. And the question is, what does it mean for us as consumers? How does it distort competition in the financial markets? And this is the question that will keep us busy for the next 45 minutes. And I would like to hear from politics first. Well, you, Armand Zorn, are a member of the Bundestag. What is your assessment of the dangers outlined in the study? Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. Thank you also for organizing this study. I have said it for years that big tech has now become system relevant, that you take a closer look, and especially when it is moving into the public sphere. So I'm really glad that somebody took the initiative so that we have a basis in order to advance the political debate. Anything that has been shown in terms of risk is what I really share. I think the word has spread that big tech has achieved a level of power that has become politically dangerous. In the past weeks and months, we have been struggling to provide an explanation for why we need or should need a digital euro. So I don't want to conceal that I feel it is necessary, but not everybody is happy if a European Central Bank really starts a project like this. But given the developments in the US with the new Trump administration, but also with the big tech companies that have completely changed. I think the digital euro should be introduced. It's not just a payment system, but it's also a question of legitimate powers of political power, and this has entered the political sphere. But when it comes to concrete tools, I think we are not there yet. For that reason, a discussion like this one can only advance the subject matter. Well, the digital euro, can you explain that? What is behind this buzzword for those in this room who have not yet heard about this concept? Well, the digital euro is a central bank money or currency. It was to be introduced, and Facebook was considering introducing an official currency in some companies, or Bitcoin has become an official currency in some countries. And for that reason, political decision makers thought about the question whether we don't need an alternative. Safety, anonymity, and credibility are the benefits, and the task really lies with the central bank, the state, and not a big tech company. The EU has really taken the initiative, and it was ambitious, as always, one could say, more than individual states. Individual states really made fun of this initiative. They said, why should we need this? And certainly you can ask and wonder whether it wouldn't make more sense for business customers, but I think it's also in retail banking when it comes to consumers, it makes sense. And we have reached a stage where technological developments are advancing and politics is also evolving. It is only in 10 to 15 years we will notice whether and that it was good to have done our homework so that we don't have to start from scratch then. Thank you. Now I would like to move over to Aya Jaff with a perspective from practice. Aya Jaff, it is also in Silicon Valley that you have spent time, and currently you are dealing with systemic criticism and also social impact of entrepreneurship. And we in this room would like to hear how widespread are payment services from Apple, Google, and others in Silicon Valley, and aren't there any alternatives to these payment services? Hello, I'm glad to be here, but I think I don't have to explain how widespread this is. The comparison in Germany and the US, there's hardly any alternative that I or my friends would notice, or also in the business world. Everybody who I know uses at least Apple Pay, even if there's a Tomorrow Bank card or another banking card behind it. But we have a very clear-cut trend that demonstrates how much this has reached the majority of society. And well, the startup side is another reason for me to be here. Well, I've been dealing with the startup industry for a decade or so, and I really started off in Silicon Valley, and I was there at the State University, and I was talking to an investor, and I met many key players. This was 10 years ago, and then, and this is still true today, Elon Musk or Steve Jobs, such characters are really presenting like the non-plus ultra as heroes where you really have to think twice, should I criticize this personality or not? And it is slowly but gradually, only now in the past 12 months, I think in the LinkedIn bubble, in the Instagram bubble, people are daring to say, well, this is not what I would morally subscribe to. And people are now trying to find ways, or they're asking themselves, what can I do? And, well, can you tell me by show of hands, do you have an idea of what you could do against this trend? Well, only a few fingers raised. Well, so this is the 0.1% vote, the political elite, it seems. In fact, it is a debate that really rips you of every optimism. I personally try not to think like, what has Elon done again? Has he shown the Hitler greeting or not? No, I don't want to elaborate on this, but I think we should take a more critical stance towards power. Have the circumstances really changed? Is there anything really new? And what I can see, there is nothing new. Billionaires are taking over our democratic values and systems, and this is all but new. But when dealing with finance, like the fintech industry, the finance industry, what it claims to be, it is just another step in the long journey that has started years ago. It is not just Trump, but it also worked through Biden and the things he still admitted. And I think one needs a long-term view. It hasn't risen overnight, but the power has consolidated in the past decade. And at the same time, I feel we are running out of time. We have to act fast. And basically, we should have acted yesterday. And we should have, well, taken more steps to supervision. Well, and this leads me to Professor Thomas Weck. You are an associated professor of public law and regulatory law at the Frankfurt School, and before that, you were a head analyst at the Pool Commission in Bonn for 10 years, 2012 to 2023. And one could say that you are an absolute expert when it comes to understanding data as a competitive edge. And now, we would really like to know how data is becoming relevant for competition and what is especially interesting about data in order to advance digital business models, to optimize the black box models.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation, first of all, and for today's discussion. And I think it's quite good that we now have a study available where we can discuss these topics. I mean, we already said it, but we are in an area where we need discussions, an area which is very, interesting. But coming back to your question, there's one point that we've not yet touched upon, however, which is quite important for the business models of the big tech companies. And this is, what do the data of the consumers tell us? They tell us what the consumer wants. And the business model of the tech companies is based on, largely on offering, of matching rather, the offers and the consumers. So in a social network, it can be different. People offer something, or maybe someone who provides content and the consumer who is looking for content. So the same holds true for the financial sector or the financial services, and they fund it via advertising. So this means that the business models are particularly successful when they know exactly what the consumers want. And this leads to a situation where markets actually can turn around towards those who are particularly good at what they do. And this leads to the questions that you've just raised. So nobody's raising his hand when we are looking for alternatives, for example. So nobody knows any alternatives because there are no alternatives in these markets anymore, because the best service is being made available by Google, by Apple or Meta, and so on and so forth. So this means that this is such an interesting area to talk about because it's also so ambivalent. On the one hand, we are talking about risks, but on the other hand, we also talk about the consumers who accept these risks on a constant basis. And so we need to know that if we really want to address the existing risks. So this means that we need a debate in politics, and of course we hopefully can provide support and facilitate that. Well, coming back to it, what motivates you as a lawyer to address the regulation for big tech in the financial sector, and where do you see the biggest legal levers, but also the biggest legal challenges? Well, first of all, what I find particularly interesting, and I was at the Monopoly Commission earlier, this is an authority which provides advice on behalf of the federal government on competition issues. So I'm a lawyer specialized on competition law. So this means we look at markets, and we, of course, keep in mind that on the one hand, we have those who provide something, who offer something, and also the consumers on the other hand. And if you look at regulation issues, then everyone you ask, of course, says, well, we want regulation. However, those who provide services, of course, want a completely different type of regulation than the consumers. And this is what you have to deal with as a lawyer for competition law. In other areas, it's much more easy when it comes to the financial market regulation. Of course, there the banks are afraid that the customers come to the banks and withdraw their money, and then the whole system will topple. So system stability is the target from the point of view of the bank, whereas the competition objectives are on the other hand. However, it's fluctuating. But what we also see is that there is also overregulation because the necessary differentiation is not being made. And then this once again brings us to a very topical debate. So if we want to deal with big tech in the financial sector in an adequate way, then we need to find an adequate regulation. We, of course, also have to avoid over-regulation. This has to be possible. But how this can be done, of course, I mean, it's difficult. One issue is mentioned in the study, and I fully support that, which is the cooperation of the regulating authorities. So first of all, we have to understand what is happening. And this cooperation, it's hard to believe, but this cooperation is not taken care of from a legal point of view. I mean, there are some regulations, individual regulations, but very often we assume, well, they will eventually do it, but we do not have a guideline for that. So this means that everyone thinks in silos, and this shouldn't happen nowadays. Well, now, Carolina, I would like to ask you the silo structure of which Professor Dr. Thomas Weck has just spoken. Could you elaborate on that? And also on the question, why is it so difficult to have a good regulatory and political response to the big tech activities? And what would we have to do in order to allow for the cooperation of regulatory authorities? I think the challenge at the big tech business model is that up until now, we have never been faced with business models that were so broad. So companies who offer completely different business units, which are interdependent to a certain extent, which reinforce themselves. Amazon, for example, also offers cloud services, the cloud service AWS. And in the year 2021, for example, there were 3 outages of the cloud service. And on the one hand, it affected the e-commerce segment at Amazon, but it also had an impact on all those who, or the small and medium-sized businesses who use these cloud services, so financial institutes, but it could even affect pharmacies, for example, who booked some of the services. And the internal interdependencies, this is something new. And as Mr. Weck has already said, in order to fully understand it, it is not sufficient to simply look at it from the point of view of the financial regulators or the competition regulators. We have to understand how are these data streams becoming relevant in the competition, and how or what is the impact of the unfair competitive advantages on the financial stability, etc. So we need a legal basis for it in order to cooperate more and to share information. And eventually, we only need the will of the supervisory bodies to get out of their silos, because this is also a matter of culture in the supervisory bodies. And people from practice say time and again that there's an unwillingness to get out of the comfort zone and one's own silo. Well, thank you very much for this description, also of this feeling that is present. I would like to come back to the political side. First of all, could you second this feeling that has just been described, and going beyond that, how's the issue of big tech and regulation and the breaking up of silos in order to improve the supervision? How is this being addressed in political Berlin? Well, first of all, and on the regulation, I would like to say that we as Europeans should not consider ourselves worse than we are. I mean, we aren't satisfied with the current situation, of course, and we aren't satisfied with the power of the big tech companies. But compared to other regions, I would say that in our countries, it's relatively fair and relatively okay. When I look at the US and the business models there, and what kind of business models are legal and possible there, I'm quite glad that in the EU we have the different legal acts on digital transformation, etc. However, what some still question is the GDPR was good, the Data Act was good, the Digital Markets Act was good regarding the questions of competitiveness, and also the AI Act that we are about to implement. So these are very important laws which were difficult to negotiate or to bring into life. So we have to make sure in Germany and in Europe that the consumer rights are protected more strongly here than in other parts of the world, and we did that. And we also have to make sure that the big tech do not get such a big market share as in other parts of the world. But of course, we cannot be satisfied with the status quo. So the relevant question is, what else can we do? How can we proceed? And I would focus more strongly on supervision. Why? And everyone has already mentioned it. It's a huge challenge for the legislator to pass regulation which keeps pace with the technological change, because we tend to see developments which, at the time of the negotiation of the new law, was not present. And Singapore, for example, of course, it's completely different in terms of size, etc. We have to admit that. But I think that the monitoring authority in Singapore shows quite clearly how it could work, that financial innovation is made possible. However, a stronger and more intensive cooperation with the tech companies and the financial institutes is possible. It works quite well. But of course, to do that, we need the preparedness of the big tech companies to cooperate, and I doubt whether they are prepared to do that. And of course, we also need a stronger cooperation between the different supervisory bodies, not only in Germany, but also at the European level. And this could also be a lever to control it. And the second aspect, which was also mentioned in the study, which I find quite good, is that eventually we have to ask ourselves the question, and I'm not one of those who say, well, we have to try to incorporate innovative companies into the old world, but the big tech companies eventually will have to decide, what are we? And they cannot simply say, we are everything. So what do I mean by that? So the split between the different business models is, I think, quite useful. Of course, it might not work out everywhere, but of course we can define critical areas where we say this needs to take place. We need to separate these business units. I mean, we did that after the financial crisis, where we said investment banking needs to be split from retail banking and concerning operative and governance questions. And from my point of view, it worked out well. So I can well imagine that with tech companies, we say that especially the area where it is about financial products or financially relevant questions, this needs to be separate in terms of governance, in terms of the operative business, because this would clarify things with regard to the supervisory bodies and their responsibilities. And I have to say there can only be a European solution. I think this is quite clear. And I do not want to be negative here or pessimistic, but on the one hand, regarding the regulation, we need to find the right path. This is the one thing. But of course, we also touch upon the global situation and the transatlantic situation. And of course, we will not be able to come up with a perfect solution and do it like this. And our American partners say, well, it sounds good, just do it. So this political debate is looming, and it will be a tough debate. And eventually, in the negotiations with Trump, we will have to put something on the table, and eventually we will have to decide what's more important for us. Where can we give something up, and where do we not want to give something up? I mean, I don't think that this is good, but this is a reality I think we are faced with since the last presidential election. One question, follow-up question, because you said we need a European response. So this means a national response to the problem is not sufficient, correct?
Clearly not. If you look at the entanglement of the international financial industry, and if you see the entanglements of the financial industry, it can't work. We have a single market in Europe, and the answer must be on a European level. Of course, it is complex. It's clear because we have all the member states with their differences and with different interests. And actually, we should also try to find proximity to Great Britain, but ultimately we need to act fast. Well, I've got more questions, but first of all, let's continue. And you have just showed it in a very plastic manner that there is this data-hungry tech industry, the tech bros, and it is about, well, enlarging their influence and, well, who are we actually dealing with? That's a question we should answer. Can big tech company be responsible players at all, especially when move fast and break things? That's the motto of Mark Zuckerberg. So the question really is whether this is typical of all big tech companies. Are they responsible partners that we can have an exchange with? I think it is very difficult to put responsibility and Mark Zuckerberg in one sentence. There must be a clear dividing line in between. well, responsibility means to rescind power, and they will not do that voluntarily. And I have to underline again and again, when looking at our societal level and our political discourse at the moment. So for that reason, I would like to mention a few things. I've just talked with Burkhard Walz from Bundesbank. We talked about digital euro. So it was Republika, this young audience, and when we talked about it, we heard, like, is it cryptocurrency? Can I invest in it? Will it make me rich? So this was the intellectual level of the discussion, and thus the concerns of my generation is they have little to do with what is happening in the US with the tech bros there. But how do I get rich? That's the main question, really. It sounds so trivial, but that's really it. This ARD program that I made for the public broadcasters in Germany, it is so shocking to see how young people are there looking, how little they earn, how difficult it is to find a job and a flat, and to raise politically responsible generation. Well, that's really a big burden. That's a paramount task. I don't expect that of consumers, but actually information like this event here that call for changing the structure. And I would like to mention figures. General Electric, General Motors, if we look at these corporations, it's like 80 to 85% that they spend on HR. But when looking at big tech companies like Facebook, it's just 1%. They only spend 1% of their earnings on their people. Why? Because each and everyone here contributes to the fact that they have more product. If we had said at that time, I want more products, more output, I buy a second machine, whereas nowadays it is, I want more users, and it means I have more things that consolidate my power, clearly. And this gives rise to the question in former times, when looking at Standard Oil, well, I want to avoid that they get too much power, so they were trying to smash them and really divide them into smaller units. But nowadays, how do you want to roll back Facebook? They have such a lot of power worldwide. So one state-based solution, like in Europe, this, or like in Germany, it will not do the trick. So it's a difficult task, but I really hope that when looking over to the US, I do hope that a new left will come about with Bernie Sanders and ANC, so that they would, silently give the wake-up call, tell people to take to the streets and become aware of reality and to position themselves differently, to question the circumstances. And I don't know about you, but concerning my background, I would really hope that this is going to happen soon. Thank you. So there seems to be a consensus that we need a pan-European answer to these challenges. And I would now like to consult Professor Dr. Weck once more. Does Germany have scope of action on a national level at all? Or is there only a lever on a European level in order to limit the power of the big techs in the financial sphere? Well, first of all, I would fully endorse what you just said, Mr. Zorn. I agree that we have a European concern, thus we need an answer on a European level. This corresponds to the results of the study. And the core resource is data. The question is how data protection is practiced. Well, the large big tech companies are controlled by federal authorities in Germany. So it could be the data protection or data security officer from Hamburg, and he may be responsible for all data from a big tech player, or somebody from Schleswig-Holstein in North Germany. So that is the status quo in data protection. And today we are not talking only about data, but we are talking about an interplay of problems. On the one hand, we have the interest that others are moving into the market too, or that's what they want. We don't have only one player, that's competition. Then we have data privacy, and we do have the financial markets concern. And the latter is a clearly European challenge, and thus we need a European answer. And on a European level, we have credibility. So if the ECB says something that's different from a tiny authority making a claim, and this also on an optimistic note, it is also on the national level that we have excellent authorities that have teeth as well. And we have, like, the data topic. We had legal proceedings against Facebook because they skimmed off too much data. It was on a federal level that the legal proceedings took place, and they were successful. It was a very long procedure. It's been settled as well, but only late last year. And the legal proceedings, they were instituted in 2016, but actually something was done against Meta, because we are talking about companies that really have a global presence and a global size, and then the small German antitrust authority was able to do something against them. No, nonetheless, the challenge is on a European level. Okay, I would now like to hear from the audience, both from the virtual audience and from the people in this room. So do make use of the QR code displayed here. We have prepared a few questions, and the code, once again, is not correct. Let me give you the new code: 24174986. Or just use the QR code and you will be directed automatically to the right place. My question is, what is your assessment? Do we absolutely need regulation, or will it be sufficient if consumers assume responsibility concerning digital payment practices? We are receiving the first answers, and it clearly looks like a call for regulation. And the answer is probably somewhere in the middle, as is the case so often, but this already gives us a great overview of the general atmosphere. Let me ask you the next question. How about the people in this room? Do we need European alternatives to Google Pay and Apple Pay and the like? Well, the question could be, do you know any alternatives?
Vielleicht mögen
Well, Vero, you just mentioned Vero. Maybe you would like to tell us about it. And some people are saying no. And maybe once we open the floor for questions, maybe we could hear from the audience what your attitude is. But anyways, the majority is saying, yes, we do need European alternatives. Vero, we just heard, or also the virtual euro that we heard about earlier. And another question is, how important is it for you to know what is happening to your financial data when using big tech payment models? Not important to extremely important. The number of participants is constantly rising.
Und wir befinden uns so im Rahmen von sehr wichtig.
So we are moving in the framework of a very important 3.5. Well, that's somewhere in the middle. That's interesting. I would really like to know who in this room defends what opinion. But anyways, we've got 2 more questions, and I know that you will be passing around a microphone for questions from the audience. But while you're looking for the microphone, I would like to ask a question to the panelists. One direct question for you, Carolina. Are there any positive aspects of using like a Google Wallet, for example, as a model for a European solution or a partnership, a private-public partnership? Could it make sense somewhere? Well, I think in a first step, when thinking about alternatives or maybe even public alternatives, that they could be an alternative to big tech, possibilities for cooperation, or if the digital euro could be held in a Google Wallet, for example. That's yet another question, but the goal should be to create possibilities for independent answers and independence from the big tech players, non-European players like a MasterCard. The benefit would be when making use of these offerings, we exactly know what consumers want. And if there's one benefit, it is convenience. Apple Pay, in particular, is extremely simple. Pay at just a click of a button, and this is so seductive, and this is why it's used so widely. And alternatives like European initiatives such as Vero do not really gain ground. They have not yet become competitive, true alternative to such services. Well, concerning the next question, a question that we discussed in our preliminary talks. Well, Finanzwende Research has talked to many players. Maybe you could, well, tell us how digital policy and questions of competition, how do they intertwine in this context? Well, as I said beforehand, well, big tech have data-driven business models. It is the analysis of data to develop new products. That's a central element here, and thus the question is relevant: what data is taken and where is it processed and further processed within the company? What products are developed here? What super convenient products are devised that are actually in a position to conquer the market and to get relevant market penetration and market shares? This touches upon the freedom so that you don't think about the processing of such data, because ultimately competitors in the financial area, they don't have data from e-commerce that they could use somehow, like, okay, at what time do people shop and what do they do then, and how can we create a nice interface for a payment option that makes life even easier or more convenient so that you can lie on your couch and still make a payment. Yes, I think this is how it becomes more tangible for us, the kind of data that they grab.
But I would like to come back to the topic of European sovereignty, and I'm looking into your direction, Mr. Weck, because it is also about the issue of the dangerously good deal, which is threatening our democracy. So the question is, how can Europe, through offering alternatives, through supervision, through more regulation, regain or gain more digital sovereignty, especially when it comes to transactions, financial transactions. Well, this is a difficult question. As I've initially said, we have to make sure that we do not only regulate the big tech companies, we actually also regulate the market and the consumers here. We have to be prepared to allow for a difficult discussion. So in concrete terms, when it comes to payment services, do you prefer Google or Apple Pay, or would you like to use a product of your savings bank or bank on the ground? Very often, the clear answer there will be a clear answer what the consumers prefer. This does not mean that you shouldn't use Google or Apple Pay, but it simply means you have to be clear about what you're doing. And the same holds true to other debates. For example, when it comes to social networks and their usage, it's also up to us. So when it comes to regulation, I'm a little bit cautious or a little bit more hesitant. I would say we do need regulation. We might also need a Digital Services Act. Of course, we need the GDPR, but we should not leave ourselves out of the responsibility. I mean, it's also up to us. And this makes it very difficult. And I, as a consumer, do consider myself responsible as well. We have an important position here, and I'm not sure whether I'm always aware of my responsibility here and whether I assume this responsibility, I have to admit. Well, this means at this point we can say that when it comes to regulation, you would like to be a little bit more cautious? No, I'm not saying that we do not need any regulation, but we have to see the whole picture. And we cannot simply pass on responsibility and say, well, politics now do something and we will not have any problems anymore. This is exactly why the big tech companies have become as big as they are, because they could rely on the consumers passively, simply using the next best thing, which was the most convenient one, without really thinking about it. And I think we have passed this time where we should do it like that. I mean, if we want to change something, then we have to become more active as consumers as well. Well, don't you agree that the insufficient regulation of the past years has allowed big tech to develop such a monopoly? Well, this is also a difficult question to answer, but for a different reason. The question is, what do we mean when we say regulation or regulate? I mean, there are many regulations that are not being consistently implemented. One reason why the Federal Cartel Office has launched this proceeding against Facebook was that the respective data protection office responsible for Facebook did not act and take action against Facebook. And of course, these big tech companies are quite complex. This is also mentioned in the study. And when an authority can decide whether it acts or not, then the law can be as good as it is. But the authorities might say, well, this is too big a case. And especially in these areas, this leads to the toppling of markets or changing of markets. And this eventually means that only one is left, one stays on. And this means that we are headed towards a discussion which will be much fiercer, because it's really difficult. And we as consumers are also part of the equation. We cannot simply say the government should do it and solve the issue, or the authorities, because they, if in doubt, they are not eager to do something. Well, and now this brings me back to the political realm. So how do you assess it? What is our role as consumers? And secondly, what do we do with such a statement? Maybe the authorities are not eager to do something and to act. Well, I do not share this view. I think we are criticizing our authorities unjustly. I mean, they're also a reflection of society. I, of course, know that a certain culture has established in politics, in civil society, in businesses, in the administration. But I think that we still see trends which is being reflected in all the different areas. And as a politician, I can tell you how I deal with the current situation. Because I get the feedback from many people, please do not regulate anything, but please make sure that nothing bad is happening. So this is what most people want, and it doesn't work like that. And I think it's a pity that, unfortunately, we have been confronted with a discussion where regulation is only considered negative. However, there are many regulations and many rules which are good, which make sure that things are fair, that the basic rights are protected. So I'm not tiring in saying that we do have many good laws. But when it comes to big tech and the financial sector, it becomes more complicated. Why? Because it is like a surgical project. I mean, we want to target them. And it has also become a geostrategic question. And it is not only about hitting the right nerve, but we still have to live with the consequences of that. And so eventually this makes it so difficult. And I think that we as a society have to define for ourselves what is our priority. And as far as I perceive it, and did so over the past years, is that the issue of sovereignty and security, not only military security, but when it comes to our way of living and how we see fit, this is currently at risk in Europe, and this is also being protected in the digital realm. And if we define it as such, if this is really the mission for politics, then of course we can work with that. But I think that in the debate in society, we should advance. And what you said, eventually we have to ask the question of power. And it's my perception that some of the structural debates over the past years were avoided. And now we have the impression that we have to act very quickly everywhere. So thank you once again for your study. I think this is a good starting point for a comprehensive debate. And I think we have to have this debate across all the different segments. Caroline, once again. Well, I would like to add one thing. Mr. Weck, maybe you didn't mean it like that, but I just wanted to say that I don't think that the authorities are lazy or don't want to act. I think sometimes these authorities are based on structures of the federal states with limited resources, which have to face up to companies with unlimited resources, and so they will really think about whether they want to start this fight. I don't think that they are lazy, or so. I'm sure you didn't mean it like that, but maybe I should add one sentence. Well, it was a certain kind of criticism I wanted to utter. So there were some authorities in the past who the political wind has changed, and now we are living in a world in which we hear, well, we have to have a firm stance, but this has not always been the case. And there were authorities in the past who said, well, it's good, or it would be great if these companies would open headquarters in our country. However, the problem is, and I said, the markets suddenly change or topple. So there's only one search engine left, one social network or whatever. So this means that you can make mistakes that you can no longer correct afterwards. And this brings us back to your paper and the discussion here. We have to be aware. We have to make sure that no other markets are toppling and are being destroyed. And I think that the authorities who showed restraint in the past would not show this restraint nowadays because they also have learned. Well, and I think what we can also say is that the study, the paper, has shown that there are certain dependencies that we might still address today if politics, the authorities, and also the consumers would work hand in hand. But it's important to understand that these dependencies can lead to disruption and a destruction of markets, and this is actually a huge risk here. Well, at this point, I would like to open up the discussion for the first questions, and there are many questions. How are we going to do this best? I think there was one question in the back that I saw right at the beginning, and then here the second question, and maybe you could stand up. The mic will come to you. Franziska, maybe you can go to the back. Well, Peter Bröschel from Leondrino. So there is a new development which has not been covered by the study, I guess. It is the stable coins, the Bamica, which are well regulated with the two alternatives in Europe. So we are quite advanced here, and the Americans are now following suit with the Crypto Advisory Board, which met in March. And so the trend that is coming from there is much more tricky than the payment function. And the thing is that the American finance ministry has clearly said with a stable coin connected to the US dollar, the role of the US dollar should be safeguarded. And I mean, they're serious about it. So we're also active in the US, where the ECB has noticed that it's becoming critical for the euro. So I would assume that before the end of the year, Amazon or Google and others will publish their own currencies. With regard to BRICS, this is good, but with regard to the euro, this is really a threat. And I don't think that there's a European response to that at the moment. I think if we had more innovation in this area, if we had venture capital so that we could become very big, and this is always the main problem, then we would have a response. The digital euro, as it is at the moment, is not really a good response. Everyone who looks into it will realize that it's too late. This will not be the answer. So my concrete question to the panel is, how, or are there any considerations to do that? Are there also deliberations to look into the waterfall model and the 3,000 euros by the bank, etc.? So I do not want to go into much detail here, but this is something that the industry does not really need, and the consumer doesn't see a really value added. Does anyone want to respond to that? But maybe we collect the second question first, and then we will answer both questions. Well, my name is Andrea 90 from Digital Courage, and my concrete question goes to Mr. Zorn, also with regard to the study that has different, starting points for action. Carolina, you have mentioned several of them. I would like to refer to the overview, to the summary, where two measures are being mentioned, and I would like to know what your assessment is. But so far, the DMA does not consider the cloud platforms, and as far as I understood you, this should be incorporated here. It says cloud services. But not only financial, but cloud services and financial services, because they are not addressed so far, and this is why it is still not addressed. And the issue of artificial intelligence, and you suggest that it should also be part of the DMA. And behind it is a reform of the DMA. So this is why it might be a second question to Carolina to explain that and your statement. How do you see the reform of the DMA and the two aspects?
Well, thank you for these two first questions, and maybe Armand Zorn would like to answer directly. Yes, these are two long questions, and we could spend 2 hours answering them, but I would try to be brief, and then afterwards we can, of course, continue the discussion. Well, the trends from the US, yes, they are really worrying. I really share that view. I am not a central banker, so it is not my central task to find solutions here, but I do have doubts whether the path we have embarked on and whether this is really good for the American society. I think this is associated with many risks, and I don't have a crystal ball, and this is not really my day-to-day business to make fiscal or monetary policy, but I do not really share your criticism regarding the digital euro. Well, the ECB really was a bit premature, really, and maybe it was not on the right path. And for that reason, the Bundestag has always insisted that other topics are more important. The discussion in the whole area is important because it creates an ecosystem, and this ecosystem is important to my mind. But the suggestions we have received so far will clearly change. And the question whether this is a limitation for the financial institutions, well, I'm optimistic that a good solution will be found, and whether it is from the part of the European Commission or across the political parties. And I really have to emphasize that we as financial intermediaries really need that, and for that reason I believe we will find a good solution. But why am I convinced? In particular, sovereignty and resilience, we discussed it earlier. You really have to imagine that all payment systems would not work or were out of order for just 1 hour. What would happen then? For that reason alone, I'm convinced that the digital euro is a very good idea. But this alone ensures that and justifies why we need it immediately. I would also like to answer to that. You were talking about venture capital, and I wish that we had bigger scale investments for that in Germany, especially from the startup area. It is an unpopular answer. So having tech pros here and fighting against tech pros on the other side of the Atlantic, I don't know if that's good. Having rules that limits this power is fine, but as a startup woman on the panel, I would also hold that bigger investments are good, but maybe not by tech pros. Maybe I can answer that question. And before I actually attempt an answer, maybe the question, once again, maybe we should repeat it. Well, should we capitalize on a DMA or not, the Digital Markets Act? Well, how long will it take, and what other questions will be included here? For that reason, my stance is that the GDPR, okay, should be adapted, but DMA, AI ordinance, I would not revisit it, because if we start talking about it, even in isolated points, many players from the EU and from outside the EU would participate and press that certain standards that have been established already would be revisited, and we could then be really become subject to pressure on both sides of the Atlantic. So for that reason, Well, it's difficult. Looking at the content and the substance, sure. If you take away politics, I would say yes, cloud services should become part of it. I see your point with AI. You would really have to take a very close look whether the AI ordinance is sufficient or not. What do you think? Doesn't it offer scope of application that is sufficient? But there is a political component to it, and it's difficult. And another point, the cloud infrastructure. We need a sovereign European cloud infrastructure that answers many questions. And once again, looking at topical themes and without wanting to preempt too much, but there is an awareness in the Bundestag, the German parliament as well. Yes, let me add on that just a correction. Cloud services are already incorporated as central platform services in the DMA, but so that the rules actually apply, the EU has to designate the gatekeepers of the big tech services, and there is no designation, and the rules exist. They're there, and the cloud sector is a very concentrated sector with vast market shares in big tech, but market regulations are not applied. And concerning the AI Act, you will be able to add on that, but it has no requirements when it comes to competition. It's about the development of models, but it is by no means about utilizing unfair competitive advantages, because when it comes to offering AI models. Well, this gives, we are receiving questions via Menti. There are participants via Menti, but there are also questions from this room. 3 questions, and we will answer the questions in the room. Michael Peterson from the Society for Information Science. And I deal with digital questions also in my private life. I've got 2 minor and 1 big question. At least 2 people in this room are not using a smartphone. In Berlin, you can pay with cash, but sometimes it's cards only. I have visited China, and sometimes it's a smartphone only. And I don't want photos of myself. Thank you. So how can you ensure access for everyone? Question 1. And the second question, Volksbank or, the savings banks as alternatives to Google and Apple. And, the savings banks, the cooperative banks, you will still use Google Wallet. So how can we set up alternative structures, promote them that are truly attractive and that mean true alternatives? Thank you. There were 2 more questions from the audience.
Ja, vielen Dank auch für die.
Thank you for these many interesting impressions. I would like to ask Mr. Zorn a question. Well, in how far are these questions part of the deliberations in the parliament, like on the digital euro? And another question. I was asked who does not use a smartphone. I'm among those. And, well, I missed it in the discussion that Mr. Zorn and Ms. Jaffe pointed to this fact. It's also a social problem or a problem in society. And is it more expensive or less convenient? Well, I'm 89 years old, and I can only tell you, I try to offer alternatives to the behavior of my grandchildren. So I want to use the cell phone as a phone only and not as a source of data for others. And it is not only about data protection or data privacy, but there are many surrounding problems. It requires a discourse in society. It is not just about gains for democracy, but it's a societal problem. Thank you.
Wer möchte gerne auf welche Frage?
Who would like to answer what question?
Thomas Weck.
Vielleicht versuche ich es einfach mal.
Well, maybe I can give it a try, departing from the last comment. And I would fully endorse what you just said. The big problem is that you cannot reproach consumers if they opt on convenient solutions. This is why the discussions and deliberations here are so difficult. What you should definitely create is an awareness. Well, if you have developments that you can only use certain payment methods, that certain people are excluded, so there should be as many liberties as possible for society as a whole. But making comments is really difficult because Niederkassel, that is a suburb of the city of Bonn, can we now tell the savings bank not to use Microsoft anymore? Well, this is difficult too. What you can definitely do is to use open source models, as was mentioned already, to create an awareness in society. For example, that as a savings bank, you do not have to use Microsoft, and it's also associated with certain legal risks because your data could be somewhat scammed by American sources. Like when switching off your smartphone, do think about where your data will end off. This is what you can tell people. And apart from that, I believe that you really have to trust that the level of regulation we have should be implemented more consistently. And regulation can't create a plain vanilla world. And when it comes to data protection, the DMA should be subject to discussion because the Digital Markets Act, when it comes to designating gatekeepers, 45 million users in Europe exist. But if a cloud service makes an offer for companies that may have millions of users, the thresholds are different, and these thresholds maybe should be revisited. Thank you. Any other comments? Well, a question that was spontaneously asked on Menti, and maybe you can display it again, whether we wouldn't have worse products that cost more. As somebody who has studied economics, more competition ultimately means better products because you have to compete in order to convince consumers, and it's good if they have a choice between 3 products or so that will become better and better. But of course, I do not know how realistic it is. But as a spontaneous comment, normally more competition means better products. And in conclusion, one more question for you, Mr. Zorn. On an EU level, the data privacy has been mentioned, and a solution including data protection should come. So how can future deliberations and decisions for big tech not fail this way we have seen it in the past? Maybe I can add on that. I think I can complete the question that was cut off somewhat. Thank you very much for the discussion and the input. And let me read out the question, Mr. Zorn. It was in early February that the privacy regulation failed, and you were talking about a holistic approach. GDPR, or the Digital Markets Act, should become subject to deliberations, and how can we achieve that these questions will not be neglected in transatlantic negotiations? Well, there is no uniform answer. Well, the way the world is the way it is, and I can't paint it the way I want, and, well, it shouldn't be. You know what discussions look like, you know what political processes are, and different players have different ideas. Concerning the coalition agreement, I'm not in a position and not even willing to share any internal secret information, but I can tell you this much: on a national level, for the Greens and the CDU, CSU, and for my party, the SPD, and the left-wing party, Die Linke, they all said, well, in the digital transformation process, can't we advance? Can't we use the benefits for the sake of society? Some have more an economic focus, but for the common good, that's one thing. And at the same time, you know, acquired standards should be maintained. Some have a focus on data usage, others on data protection, but I do not think this is a major national challenge. On a European level, it is different, and you will know that. And on a global level, yes, of course. But what I can promise you, and this is what I stand for, that innovation and the benefits of modern technologies shouldn't be a contradiction to social, ecological, and societal standards. So basically, they only work hand in hand. This is my standard. I don't know if I will prevail, but this is my concept, and this is what I want to obtain in the next few months and 2 weeks.
Well, thank you very much. I would like to allow for a final question from the audience now before we come to the final statements. And you already have the microphone there. Sandra Leni Ritter, Leondra, GmbH. So it's less a question than much food for thought, much more food for thought to the people sitting here, but also the panelists and towards politics. So Mr. Weck earlier said one should think about where the data goes when I turn on the smartphone. But I personally have not much of a problem with that, because I know that because I agreed to one of the big techs and a contractual relationship with it before I become a user. And if I read all the stuff, through all the stuff, I know what I'm doing. But what I'm forced to have is a bank account, an address, and postal services and the banking institutes sell my data, and credit reform, Schufa, or whatever their name is, are trading with my data. I do not gain anything in it. I cannot do anything against it, because I do have to have a bank account and I do have to have an address, but I do not have to have Apple, Google, Facebook, Amazon, MoneyPay, or whatever. So this is one aspect. And the last food for thought is, because Mr. Zorn touched upon that earlier, well, what happens if there's such a concentration of power in these cloud service providers and then they are gone, they fail? But honestly, the central banks, the ECB, I think they are running on IBM mainframes. IBM is also an American company. And so the banks here also use Amazon, Google. And even if you would say, well, we are offering a Germany cloud, a Deutschland cloud, then, well, IBM, Google and others will participate, and we won't get away from them.
Doch den einen oder anderen größeren Player, was entgegenzusetzen.
Or we should have a bigger player to counter that, a European player who is not violating regulations and sticking to the rules. Thank you very much. And this brings us almost to the end. I would like to say that the study we have heard a lot about can be accessed through the QR code. And if you go to the hall downstairs for a little snack, you can find it there, or go to the website of Finanzwende Research. And now I would like to invite you to give a final statement. I also brought along some questions, starting with Armand Zorn. We would like to know, what do you take home from today's event for your work today and tomorrow, but especially for your coalition negotiations? Well, thank you very much for the invitation and for the good discussion. I take home a lot. I mean, this is what you usually say as a politician, but today I really mean it. So thanks in particular for the study and the concrete proposals that you mentioned there, because this is always something that brings us into the right direction. Of course, we still have some way to go, but this is the right direction, I think. Thank you very much for the discussion and the good questions from the audience. I take home, once again, that open source, which has always been quite clear, but if we look at it from a point of view of sovereignty and financial market stability, or stability altogether, then it becomes quite clear again how essential it is. And maybe as I'm also a financial politician and also a left-wing financial politician, I think we have to have an honest discussion. If you want to achieve these objectives together, then we have to know that it comes with a price tag. And I'm quite glad that we have the special fund for infrastructure, but this is not going to be sufficient, and many questions will arise at the European level. This is why I would like to invite you to participate in discussions about financial issues and make sure that we can shift the debate to a certain extent and make sure that those who want to achieve sovereignty and a good future cannot do it by saving money, by cutting back, but we have to spend money in order to have a good future. And thank you very much again for the invitation. Hiya, Jeff. I'm not sure how frequently you are in Silicon Valley, but I'm sure you have contacts and friends there and are in constant exchange. So I would like to know, we would like to know, what do you take along for the next discussion or next visit to Silicon Valley? Well, oh my God, your anger. I'll take along your anger. Well, this is a good question, because at the beginning of April, I planned a trip to Boston. I will take along a burner phone, because at the border, they look at your smartphone, I was told. I already had to give them all my social media accounts, so they tried to find out whether I'm critical, at least after the publication of my new book, Polygarchy. It will be very difficult. And what I take along is that it's going to be my last trip to the US, probably. As someone who was born in Iraq and was in Iraq over the past years. I mean, Trump was already difficult during the first presidency, where he said you will not get here without a visa, and now it's getting even stricter. This is sad, but this is the future that we are headed towards. But when I look at the faces here, then I luckily see many rebels amongst you, people who pay cash out of principle, and I've like that. I will take this along and proudly say, well, made in Germany, and I will pay cash. And I think we heard already that there will be a new book, so great. Professor Dr. Weck, what do you take home from this discussion for your current work? Well, first of all, I will take home a very positive picture of our discussion in society. I assume that we had a cross-section of society here, the part of society which is aware of the problem, and this is quite good. We had a great discussion, and I can only agree to what Mr. Zorn has said in the beginning. I'm quite grateful for the discussion. But, of course, we also have to see that there are different levels. So what can I personally take home and what is the task for others? So regarding this study, I mean, this is not my task, but these are difficult questions that are mentioned there which need to be solved. So how do we deal with the fact that on the one hand we have the digital economy and the competition issue, and on the other hand financial topics that are very sensitive topics. And we should be aware that when it says that there are risks, that we should take it seriously. Because the financial market problems, when they appear, are difficult to rein in. Just think of the financial crisis. So if you want to take home something for you personally, and this is also what I take home personally, is, I mean, via the browser and in your browser histories, you can see what kind of behavior you have online. And I find it quite frightening when I look at the history, browser history. But this might help us think about the message that we send out, the data about my creditworthiness that I send out. This is what we could do at our personal level when it comes to dealing with the internet. And I think this is also something that, I mean, we've been given a wake-up call in this event to do that. So thank you very much. Well, we are running out of time. This is why I would like to give Carolina Melches the last word. So what are the next steps after this final study? And how can interested people here in this room, for example, become part of the citizens' movement? Well, thank you very much also from our side. Well, the study is now finished. A possible European response is what we try to define, and the next steps will be how can it be possible to see to it that politics and critical actors start to act. And we hope that we have made an important contribution with our study. And it was great to see tonight in how far it is already reflected in different areas, and the fact that many sides are already aware of that. Because on the one hand, we have worked on this study for a year now, and we had the impression that everything evolves only around that. But the other thing is the society as a whole, where everyone is faced with different problems. So, I mean, how can interested parties become a part of it? I mean, I said I'm representing Finanzwende Recherche today, and of course, you can always support us by, for example, sharing our studies and making other people aware of it. And the citizens' movement, Finanzwende, can be actively supported by you. On the one hand, you can help us throughout our campaigns. This means also a hands-on approach during the campaigns. But if you have expertise, expert knowledge in the financial sector, you can make this expert knowledge available to us. And of course, you can also become a funding member and help us work independently, so via donations, and also the contributions of members help us. So thank you very much for that. Well, and at the end, I would like to say a big thank you to all panelists and also to the audience for the lively discussion. I take home, I will be very brief, I will take home that big tech is one of the biggest challenges for society, for democracy, and the economy in the digital age. So this is a topic which will definitely accompany us for a very long time. I will learn and have learned a lot from you, and I'm looking forward to another exchange over a pretzel or some apple juice. So thank you very much. My name is Yolanda Rote, and it was a huge pleasure for me to be your host tonight, and see you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.